Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE JSP tutorial. Now we are watching the final part of the subseries JSP and SQL Server. So in the previous video we created the MS SQL JNDI using the WildFly admin console. So we changed the module, we created a module.xml, and using that we defined the driver, and we asked WildFly to load the driver. Then using the server console, we linked the driver and specified the Microsoft SQL Server database location. We also specified we will use the pubs database. In this video we will create an example, and that will use the data source which we created in the part 3. So of course the prerequisite is all 3 parts, the previous 3 parts, as well as this Servlet tutorial 1 that tells how we set up the WildFly environment within the Eclipse. So once you complete this, then you have to complete all previous 3 parts, then you can proceed with this video. So in the first part we saw how to add a user, admin as a super user. Then we set up our Eclipse so that we can query the SQL Server stuff within the Eclipse itself. Then in the previous part we configured the SQL data source. First we changed the module.xml, then we changed the standalone.xml. After that we used the server console to create the DSN. Now we will talk about the example which we are going to create here in this part. So this is the query we are going to execute, and if you see, ultimately we are taking data from the titles table, and these are all the column, and the database is pubs and table name is titles. SQL Server, and the database here is the pubs DB. Then we will create a bean for this title. So we will name this bean as a title bean. So ultimately the title bean will contain three fields. One is title and another one is type and then price. Then we will define header and setter method. And next we will create a servlet, and we will call this servlet as display books. This is a servlet, and we will also create a JSP file, and the JSP also we will name it as display books. So if you see what happens, the user will be in a browser session. So first they will make a GET request here. That means they will directly browse the displaybook.java. So usually it will not be like this, but here for demo purpose, here we are directly accessing the servlet. In usual case it will go through a HTML, and HTML will invoke the servlet. Here from browser we will make a GET request. Otherwise you can create a HTML file and you can provide a link, and that link will invoke this servlet. Alright, here we will make a GET request for this servlet, and the servlet will make use of WebXML and JBoss Web XML also we can use. So we will specify both, and so here the servlet will make use of this configuration, and in this configuration we will use our DSN. So DSN we previously created, right? DSN or JNDI. So we will specify this database connectivity detail here, and here in the display book, once we make a request, first we will hit the database and we will retrieve the data here. So that's the first action we will do. We will use this query. We will retrieve the record set Java object. After that we will so that's the first one. The second one will be retrieving through record set. So after retrieving it, we will store the retrieved content in a bean. So that will be the third action. So that happens from this display book itself. Then we will ask the JSP file. So here the control will be transferred to display the content. So what happens, the JSP file will contact the bean, or it will read the bean and sends the response. So the JSP will ultimately use some HTML tag to display the book contents. So once again to reiterate, from the browser we will make a GET request for this display book servlet, and first it will make use of this JNDI detail, and it fires this SQL statement in the SQL Server pubs database. Then it retrieves the content, then stores that in the title bin. So here if you see, we will use the request context. Actually we perform a set here. So in the JSP we actually use the request context, and here we will do that in the get context. So actually here the bean will be set with whatever data read from the SQL Server. Then after reading that, it sets the attribute with this bean. Then it redirects, or it transfers the request and response to the JSP file, and JSP file will use this request context stuff and reads the bean detail, that means the title, type and price, then displays that information and sends a response to the browser. So ultimately we will end up with creating these XML files, web XML and JavaScript web XML with the DSN, which we created in the part 3 of this subseries. Then in the second we will create this servlet file, and we will start implementing the code to read the content and set everything in the title. So in between we will create this Java bean also, title Java bean. Previously we created customer bean, right? The same way we will create the title bean here. That's one file. Then we have to create our JSP file. So that's all required. Yeah, that's all required. So 4 files we will create, and so we can name this as a title.java, titlebean.java, displaybooks.java, then this is displaybooks.jsp. Alright, now it's demo time. Let's go and implement this. Here I'm starting the Eclipse Neon workspace demo. So you can take backup of this workspace demo as well as your WildFly server application server folder. Both you can take backup. So this is the example. So far we created a customer detail.jsp. I mean in the previous part we learned about the Java bean. We already created one bean customer. Now this time we will create titles bean. Okay, now we will switch to this database development, and in part 2 of this sub-series we created these two connection to work with the database here inside the Eclipse itself, or you can open your SQL Server Management Studio and check the query. So now I'm connecting here. Okay, so I'm opening the scrapbook. So old is connected, so I'm taking this, then pubs database. So here we are just checking the query, choosing execute selected text result. So this is the content we want to retrieve, and then we will display this information inside a web page. Alright, now let's go back to the JavaEE perspective. So if you expand the web.inf, so inside you will be seeing a web.xml file. So here we have our welcome list. After this welcome list or before, so it's good to add this entry after the welcome list. And if you see here, we are using the resource reference and then MS SQL DS. So this is the name we gave when we opened the WildFly administration console, and when we added the SQL Server DSN, this is the name we gave. And so resource reference name is MS SQL DS. Then this is the entry. Resource type is JavaEE SQL data source. Then other informations are added here. So now we are done with our web.xml. Now we will create JBoss related config detail. So this web.xml is common for any container, whether it is WildFly or Tomcat, whatever it is. The web.xml will have the standard which is common for all the vendors. And now we will create the content that is specific to JBoss. So now I'm right clicking web.inf, then choosing new file. Then I'm choosing JBoss web.xml, then adding the entries here. So XML version 1 encoding is UTF-8. Then here we are using the JBoss web public. That's the document type, and what's important here is inside this JBoss web. So these are all the standard, you can use any template, and what is important here is this resource ref. So resource ref is MS SQL DS. This is the resource name and then JNDI name. So when we ran through the wizard of creating the data source name, and the very first step we saw that the name is MS SQL DS and we accepted the default, right? And the second one what we accepted is the JNDI name, Java/: MS SQL DS. So that's what we are specifying here. This is the name and this is the JNDI name, so that we specified here in the JBoss web. and the WildFly server will make use of this DSN name, and it knows how to connect to the database, and we will see this soon. Next we will create our servlet. So okay, so I need this package name, so I'm copying it, and I'm using new servlet. Then in the package, instead of beans here, I'm giving a servlet. So here I am giving a display books. So the table name what we are querying is titles. The title table will contains the title for the books. So that's why here we are naming our servlet as display books. So here we are going with the servlet, and the URL mapping is a display books. Description I'm not typing anything. So in the slide we told that user will directly browse this servlet. That means we are not posting anything. Then we need the doGet method, and let's have a constructor from superclass, and we want to override only this doGet method. Let's finish. So here I am doing some cleanup stuff. All right. So the very first step is defining the resource name. Here if you see, we are using the attribute from JavaX annotation at resource MS SQL DS, and data source we are taking it from SQL, and we will save this. Okay, this should not be inside the get, it should be the member. Next we are inside the doGet method, and we defined a string. So select title type price from titles. So inside the doGet method, connection we are taking it from java.sql, statement java.sql, result set java.sql. Surround with a try catch. Okay, or okay, we will do this. I think same try catch is expected for all these statements. All right, now let's quickly review it. Connection equal to null. So first we are getting the connection. So if you see ds dot get connection, and if you see here how we declared or annotated this private data source ds, and here we are using the annotation resource, and the name we are specifying it as mssql.ds. and if you see here, it's defined here as well as here in the JBoss, and through the JNDI it knows how to connect to the database. So it knows what driver to load, and it knows which database to connect, and where is the database server location. Server location is a local host, database is pubs, the driver is defined through the module, and that get loaded. So here the connection is ready. Then we are creating the statement, and for the create statement we are passing this SQL string. The method execute query, which takes this select query, will execute this query on the connection and then returns the result set. So the result set will have one or more number of records. So now we have to iterate through those records. So the execute query will execute this SQL statement and returns the result, and we are storing that as a result set. So we may have multiple result, and now let's go ahead and create our bean, because inside the bean only we want to store the retrieved result. So in the slide we explained, the servlet will post the, it queries the database, retrieves the result, then stores that inside the bean using the request context. So now we need to create the bean. So once again we will take this new class, package. Here we will create bean. Inside the bean we will give class name as a title. So that's all we need. Let it get derived from object itself, and we will click finish. We will define 3 fields. Right click, source, getters and setters for all 3 fields. So sample 6 is nothing but our bean class, and if you see, as already told, we are respecting the camel case here. Don't give a capital letter as a very first one, then you will end up with Jasper expression. You will end up with the exception. So now we have our bean class ready, title bean, and we know that this will retrieve the result title, type, price. We have a matching field, title, type and price. That means we can iterate through this result set. So code snippet 7 I am giving, why? Because 6 is here, this bean. So first we are defining the list from, this is not UI list, it's a list from util, and we will import array list also. And here if you see the result set dot next, that means we are iterating through it. Then we are creating our title bean. So I'm importing it from coding examples.bean. We are in each iteration we are creating a bean, then we are setting the data which is read from the database, and then finally we are making call to titles.add. So titles is nothing but a array list, and this array list contains one or many instances of our bean title. The bean name here is title, we named it as book title. We are populating the field, then we are adding it to this collection array list. Since our database operation is completed, we are doing the cleanup. So if you see record set statement, from statement only we called execute query. Then connection, if you see we are making use of our resource name. All right, now we have the data which was read from the Microsoft SQL Server pubs database is ready here inside this array list. So now we will go to the request context. So when we talked about the Servlet tutorial, in that Servlet tutorial we explained about the request context. So if you watch that video, you will understand what is the request context. So here request, or I can simply put this as req response. So request dot set attribute, and here I am naming this as a book title, that's the string name, and what I am storing here is the titles. So titles we already have the collection, we iterated the record set, and we created bean one by one and set the database read content, and the title collection here I am setting it to the request context, and the context name is book title. Request dispatcher is from JavaEE Servlet, so I'm importing it, and request dot req, that means request is here, incoming parameter http servlet request dot get request dispatcher display books.jsp. This file we haven't yet created, but we talked about this in the PowerPoint slide. All right, so it sets the context, request context, then we are getting the request dispatcher for this specific file, then we are forwarding the request and response stuff to this, or we are delegating the remaining stuff to this display books.jsp. So here we did all the request processing. That means once user makes a GET request for this servlet, it contacts the DB, it executes the query, iterates through the record set, populates the bean, then sets the request context, delegates the call to the JSP file, and the JSP will take care of presenting the data to the user and giving the response to the browser session. Now we will create a new JSP file. Display books.jsp, and clicking next. New JSP file. Template is a JSP with the HTML markup. Basic template only I am choosing here. Click on the finish button. Here we are including the title bean because we are going to use this title bean from the request context. Then we are using the array list. Why? Because in the request context we actually set the array list, and the array list will contain the collection of a title, which is nothing but title bean. Then we use the list attribute also for iteration purpose. Next, after opening the HTML or after closing this head tag, here we are making use of the bean tag to refer the bean collection. So if you see here, JSP use bean, that's the tag we are using. We already saw this in one of the example. So customer bean we used it, right? That time itself we saw this technique, the same stuff we are using. JSP use bean tag. Then book titles, that's the ID we are giving, and class is java.util.arraylist. Scope is a request scope. Why? Because here we are setting it in the request object, this book titles. So use bean book titles, and if you see here, this book titles is titles, which is nothing but the array list. So what bean here we are using is the book titles bean, and which is nothing but the array list and request. So here we are simply stating that we want to use array list and scope is request, and we are using the bean because each element here is a title bean. So that's what. So use bean, we are done with it here. So we told that we want to use array list, which is nothing but the bean, collection of bean. So then inside the body tag, we already told what bean we are going to use from the request context. Here inside the body, so at present it will show error, don't worry about it. For loop we are forming book title, and if you see here we are directly using the book titles, which is nothing but the ID book titles dot size, because that's the array list here, which will give number of result set which is retrieved here. And then here book titles dot get, we know that each array list entry is a title, and here we are using the title book title. So now we have a reference. When we are iterating through it, we will get book title one by one. Then here we are using the expression language, we already talked about it. This will substitute the content along with the h4 book name. This is the HTML content, and this is the dynamic content, and since we are using the percentage equal, this will substitute the book title dot get book title. That means it will go to our bean and make a call to the getter method and displays the book title here. Likewise, we display the type as well as the book price. So this one is in h4 heading tag, and remaining two we print in normal paragraph tag. So the error is shifted here now. So now here we opened a for loop. We are iterating through the bean book titles. Then we are printing that. Then we have to close it. So here we are closing the for loop, and this is just a paragraph to say end of report stuff. Now we are done with the implementation. Here let's first add the JSP file, finish, and we will start the server, WildFly server. So WildFly server is started. Now we will run our servlet. So here we are making call to the servlet, run on server. So if you see, it displayed the result, or if you want to run it on some other browser, you can do that. Display books, that's what we are here. We are directly invoking the servlet, and you know how it is contacting our database and displaying the formatted information. So it displays all the titles are displayed in H4 and remaining to get it displayed in paragraph tag. After finishing everything, we are closing the report. So that's all here. Now you may get an idea of how we are using the database connection to retrieve the information, and we store that in a bean. Then we store that bean in a request context, and then we delegate the call to the JSP, and the JSP will do the presentation stuff by mixing the HTML and the dynamic JSP content. All right, now let us stop the server. So since we did a lot of configuration here, you can take a backup of your workspace WS demo, as well as go to your WildFly directory and zip it and name it as WildFly with SQL Server database connection, so that later you can unzip and refer wherever you want. Sorry for a lengthy video. It requires that much work to demonstrate how we connect to the database and how we use our bean to retrieve the persisted content, and then use that bean using the useBean tag on the JSP file. That's all here. Thank you for watching. Bye.